we just looked at, if you look at systems like the Hay system and the Patterson ranking system and so on, that's where we found that South Africans at the bottom end of the employed scale get paid quite a significant amount more than they should be. And that has to do with productivity. It has to do with a lot of other, things like responsibilities, etc. It has nothing to do with whether you're a CEO or not, because the biggest difference, believe it or not, is in the poverty stakes is not between the top end, the management, and the bottom end, the worker. The biggest difference is between the worker and the unemployed, those people that only receive welfare, and that's what we're looking at here as well. So, this is not something that defends capitalism or not. I don't think that's the point of this at all. That's at the end, Thulani, it's very simply this. If workers were so unsuccessfully represented, and if they, then they would have something to complain about. But right now, if you look at South African average salaries, and we're talking salaries, we're not talking the self-employed, we're looking at about 13,200 Rand, and that would place us, quite well within the rich world. So, let's take an extreme example, if I may. An Indonesian teacher, for example, would get about, in South African rands, on a purchase parity basis, about 7,500 Rand a year. So when we look at that, then we have to say to ourselves, but wait a minute, yes, our teachers may feel that they are underpaid, but, relative to the Indonesian teacher, they are overpaid. So, and that's, I said, an extreme example. But then it wouldn't only be our teacher that's overpaid relative to that. It would also be our unskilled worker that would be overpaid. And in effect, what I'm saying in South Africa is if you look at the whole makeup of the labor market, the worker that works for the state specifically is well and truly overpaid at the lower levels. The worker that works for the state-owned enterprises is also well and truly overpaid for their responsibilities. In the private sector, it's much less pronounced, and that overpayment is much, much less. There's no doubt about it. But then again, on the top end of the state and the top end of the state-owned enterprises, you could argue once again that people are not as overpaid because most of that overpaid in relative terms is on the bottom end, the people without skills. And here's the one fact that nobody can get away with. In South Africa, about 30% of the people employed by our economy have no skills. Yet the unemployed, 60% of them have no skills. So for us to employ more unskilled people, we would have to, at the end of the day, find a cheaper way of employing them. So we're looking for a solution here, not to make things more and more difficult for ourselves. So I think we need to look at the bigger picture and see what it is. Because if we look at, for example, the skills side, in what we could call tertiary people who have gone on from finishing matric and so on. Only 6% of the unemployed come in from that category.
You see, that's a very interesting one, because my next question would have been to you, in terms of rands and cents, they may be getting a lot more than people elsewhere, but does it mean that they are rich? In other words, does it mean South Africa's...
Well, what is rich? Would you agree with me that if you're in the top 20% of earners in South Africa, that you are rich, of adults earners in South Africa, that you are rich?
Maybe rich is a wrong term here, but they can afford more than workers elsewhere in the world.
Well, let's put South Africa into the category we like being part of the BRICS, of the BRIC countries. I would argue very, very clearly our people get paid a lot better than those of India, Brazil, China, maybe even Russia. So we're of the BRIC countries, we're definitely the richest. People that work in South Africa, because only 4 out of every 10 adults work, they are the rich part of South Africa. They're in the richer half. And if you look at the formal sector, only 3 out of 10 adults are actually in the formal sector. And if you're earning 32,000 rand a month, you're in the top 5%. You're stinking rich. And, that puts Mr. Vavi in the stinking rich category. And the problem in South Africa is, at this moment in time, we're looking at people that are employed, on average, earn 13,000 rand a month. And that means that those people, in a relative and an absolute sense, purchase power parity considered, are not as poor as we'd like to think we are. We're much richer than the people in Greece. Our private sector earns about the same as Portugal. Our government sector earns the same as Germany. So that's what we're putting across here. And certainly for a developing country, we cannot afford, with the productivity levels that we have, to have our government sector earn as much as Germany. And if you want to put it into another picture, the other thing is where the growth of jobs have come from is from the tax base, because the government now has more people in employ than mining and manufacturing combined. And that, any economist will tell you, is not a good thing, because it means your productive sector is going to remain heavily taxed into the future, and not many people are going to want to invest in your country.
Fine. We'll interrogate some of these factors, but let me bring in Professor Malikane then. He's been listening. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that, firstly, there's a problem here with the way Mike is approaching these issues. There are 3 problems that I've identified with his report. The first problem is, of course, the problem of data sources. Where he gets his data from at the end of the report, which are slides really. He mentions Stats SA, he mentions OECD, he mentions the United Nations and so forth. However, when you look at the Stats SA figures, they differ markedly compared to what he's saying. The second problem is the issue of measurement. If you compare, for example, in one of his slides, he compares unit labor costs in the OECD and unit labor costs in South Africa. However, it's not clear whether these unit labor costs that he compares are measured in the same currency. And thirdly, the question of income distribution. Mike basically uses the average. The average South African earns 13,000 rands a month. However, there are massive inequalities in this country in terms of income. So to use an average as an indicator in this instance is a problem. If you recall, the Minister of Finance himself even stated that 50% of South African households actually live on 8% of national income, which makes it very problematic if you use the average to capture the South African situation, given the massive income inequalities that we have. I can go on and on. But
sure, let's just get a response to those 3 points, because I think they're valid points there, Mike.
Not at all. First of all, my data sources are Statistics South Africa, and it's the quarterly employment survey of the formal sector, which is, quite frankly, the one area that we can compare, because the labor force survey doesn't give us much of an average salary. In a sense, when you ask people their own salary, they differ, because some people look at it as a net salary that they get out at the bank, and some people look at it as a gross salary. So from the salary perspective, one has to use the quarterly employment survey. The OECD country, I don't understand the criticism that Chris is trying to pull here. But let me also just say, the biggest inequality, if only 3 out of every 10 adults are working in the country, okay, in the formal sector. If you earn over 8,000 rand in South Africa, or 9,000, or whatever that exact level is, I haven't got it right here, the fact of the matter is, you're in the richer part of the equation. You are part of the people that are rich in South Africa. You are part of our problem of inequality then. Okay. If you are part of the problem, to be part of the solution, we must find a way of lifting the others up, because that's the real question.
All right.
It's not because somebody earns 8,000 rand, it's because somebody doesn't have a job. And Chris has got to understand that.
All right. Chris wants to say something. But let me point this out, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Chris, that as a point of departure, we all agree that this economy has not created jobs for the people, period. Yes. That's it. But the issue is, why is it that this economy is unable to do so? That's where the issue is, because again, then, as far as I understand, Mike, it's because perhaps of how we're dealing with entry levels and as far as wages are concerned. Do you agree? Is that where we should start discussing this matter?
Of course I don't agree. I think Mike should tell us what is the wage on average that an African earns in the South African economy, an African female earns in the South African economy. As COSATU, we've done a study in our growth path document. The statistics are there from Statistics SA. They tell us that actually more than 71% of African female heads of households earn less than 800 rands a month. That is according to the survey, a community survey of 2007. So we can go on and on. White people in South Africa, their unemployment rate is around 6%. And for Africans, their unemployment rate is around 28% using the restricted definition. But white people are earning more than Africans. And Africans with the same qualifications, with the same experience, controlling for everything, Africans still earn 22% of what white people earn in the South African economy. But white people are not unemployed despite their high wages. Even if you divide by 5 rands, Mike, by 5, the PPP, it's still low. It will be around $200. Can you survive in the US with $200?
You want us to survive in the richest country in the world.
But
we can't make everybody a J.R. Ewing.
But
quite frankly, the fact of the matter is, it says relative to ourselves, we can survive here. I think that's what I'm saying. The people that are earning money in South Africa are not earning badly, and yes, there are differences between races. There's no doubt about it. But then I could also argue that because of apartheid, the white people are more educated than the black people and therefore should be earning more. Although it comes from apartheid, that would be one of the reasons why that is happening, and that's why they can find jobs. Just emotions or anything
there's no
like
emotion,
that.
Mike. There's no emotion. The issue here, the fact of the matter, is that you and I should agree that the inequalities in South Africa are fundamentally racial inequalities, and they cannot be reducible to education. Studies have been conducted controlling for education, age, experience, even location. They found that African graduates tend to have a lower probability, almost half of getting a job compared to whites. So you have to resolve that fundamental question.
No, we have to.
You can't deny it. It's not emotion. It's not emotion.
This is a discussion about everybody, and you brought race into it. So I'm just saying, if you then look at it and you say you take the employers out of the situation, then, the whites make up only their part of the labor force at this moment in time. Because if you look at somebody that's an employer, then you've also got to take that into consideration and only look at employees. But let's look at your median. It's 2,900 Rand is the median salary of employees in 2010. I've got the Stats SA document in front of me. Employers is 7,916 Rand. Own account workers, or let's call them the self-employed to make it easier, is only 1,950 Rand.
Mm-hmm.
So, if an employer only earns 2.5 times that of his employee, that is not enough compensation for the risks that an employer is taking.
But you see
that's what I'm saying.
But you see the error, Mike, that you're making.
Things differently to you. You're dividing things amongst race and sex
everything
like that. No, you're living in apartheid.
Yes, because it exists.
I'm saying
it
let's
exists.
Look at employees, let's look at employers, let's look at own account workers, and let's look at how we can get these people into jobs. Let's not start any war or anything like that.
There's no war,
at why people are not finding jobs.